Good evening everyone, and welcome once again to Story Villa. Tonight, we set off on a chilling ride across America's most haunted highways, where 10 true trucker horror stories will forever alter the way you look at those endless stretches of road. These accounts are taken straight from the logbooks and testimonies of long-haul drivers who encountered things along our nation's most desolate routes that simply cannot be explained. From the ghostly hitchhikers that roam Interstate 82, the bizarre time-warping loops of US 50. Each tale reveals a documented brush with forces that seem to linger on America's highways long after the midnight hour. These are not just campfire tales or rumors swapped over greasy truck-stop coffee. They are substantiated events, supported by dashcam footage, CB radio transmissions, and official reports that freight companies would much rather keep buried. What makes these encounters even more disturbing is the consistency in details across decades and thousands of miles, which suggests that certain roads never truly rest. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Story Villas for daily, true horror stories that explore the darkest mysteries hiding in plain sight. Tap that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover America's most terrifying secrets. And now, let us merge onto those forgotten highways, where reality frays at the edges, and the impossible becomes inevitable, where each mile marker could be the last one you'll ever pass. That night, the National Weather Service issued no alerts for Interstate 80. Clear skies spanned endlessly across the Nevada desert. Visibility stretched for more than 10 miles, and the temperature hovered at a steady, comfortable 62. For Marcus Rodriguez, a 34-year-old veteran trucker with 12 spotless years behind the wheel. It should have been just another uneventful run from Salt Lake City to Reno. His 2018 Peterbilt 579, kept in pristine condition and outfitted with every modern safety feature, rumbled smoothly across a highway he had traveled more than 200 times. Marcus was known for his meticulous preparation. His logbook entries were legendary among dispatchers for their precision, recording everything from fuel efficiency to detailed weather notes. On that October evening, he had logged his departure from the Salt Lake terminal at exactly 9:47 p.m., hauling a trailer loaded with electronics bound for California. The route was second nature by now. Interstate 80 west, through the Nevada desert, past Wendover, across the Salt Flats, and over the Sierra Nevada range. He knew every truck stop, every inspection station, and each mile marker along the stretch, from Utah to California. By 11:43 p.m., 4 minutes ahead of schedule, Marcus cruised past mile marker 45 near the small desert town of Hawk. The road unrolled before him like polished black glass, broken only by the piercing beam of his LED headlights. His CB radio occasionally sputtered with distant voices, but mostly he was lounged to his thoughts and the steady hum of the diesel engine. That's when he noticed her dot, at precisely 11:47 p.m., his digital clock glowing on the dash. An elderly woman appeared in his headlights near mile marker 48. She stood on the shoulder of the road, one arm raised in the universal plea for help, the other clutching what looked like a small suitcase. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he hit the brakes, the air brakes releasing a hiss, while the massive truck and its 18 tons of cargo slowed to a halt about 50 yards. Beyond her, he had picked up stranded motorists before, though company policy strongly discouraged it. Yet something about this woman was different. She appeared to be in her 70s, dressed in a cream-colored gown far too formal for standing alone on a desert highway past midnight. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, unaffected by the breeze that should have tousled it in the open night air. Climbing down from his cab, Marcus approached, but noticed something unsettling. She cast no shadow beneath the glare of his headlights. "Thank you for stopping, dear," she said softly, her voice unnaturally clear as it cut through the desert silence. "I have been waiting such a long time." Her accent was faintly European, perhaps German. When she smiled, Marcus saw her teeth unnaturally white and straight, almost too perfect for someone her age. "What happened to your car, ma'am?" Marcus asked, scanning the desert roadside for any sign of a vehicle. But there was nothing. No wreck, no engine smoke, not even tire marks, just endless emptiness stretching into the dark. "There was an accident," she answered calmly, shifting her grip on the suitcase. "Such a terrible accident, but that was long ago. I need to get to Reno to see my daughter. She will be so worried." Her eyes reflected the light oddly, glinting almost like those of an animal, though Marcus brushed it off as an effect of the headlights. Against all protocol and instinct, Marcus found himself agreeing to take her along. Something about her frail but composed demeanor, her urgency and sorrow, overrode his professional caution. He helped her climb into the cab, startled at how cold her hand felt, despite the warm desert air. She seemed to weigh almost nothing, as though she were made of mist rather than flesh and bone. As the truck eased back onto the highway, the elderly woman began reminiscing about Reno, speaking, with vivid clarity, about its streets and landmarks. She mentioned the old Mapes Hotel, as though it were still open for business, though Marcus knew it had been shuttered since 2000. She spoke fondly of train rides to see her daughter, despite the fact that Reno's passenger rail service had been discontinued decades earlier. Marcus chalked up her outdated recollections to age and the trauma of whatever accident had left her stranded, finding her misplaced sense of time more endearing than troubling. Roughly 20 miles later, near mile marker 68, she suddenly lifted a trembling hand toward the right side of the road. "You must slow down here, dear. Just beyond that curve, the road is slick with black ice. Very dangerous for a truck your size." Marcus instinctively glanced at the dashboard. His temperature gauge read 64, far too warm for ice. Yet the urgency in her tone carried a weight that made him ease off the throttle anyway. "Ma'am, it's too warm tonight for ice to form," Marcus said carefully, trying not to dismiss her but feeling compelled to explain the impossibility of her warning. "No, dear," she replied, her voice taking on an eerie echo. "Trust me, I've seen what happens when drivers don't listen." Marcus turned toward her, and his blood went cold. The passenger seat was empty. The old woman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a faint scent of old-fashioned perfume and a small damp mark on the seat where she had been sitting seconds before, jerking the wheel. Marcus slammed on the brakes, panic flooding his mind. She could not have simply disappeared from a moving cab, 60 feet above the ground. He pulled onto the shoulder and searched every corner of his truck with a flashlight. Nothing, no footprints, no belongings, nothing but that damp patch on the seat and the lingering aroma of lilacs. Shaken, Marcus eventually forced himself back onto the road. As his truck rounded the curve the woman had warned about, his headlights caught a slick sheen glinting across the pavement. A nearly invisible layer of black ice stretched for a quarter mile, visible only at the precise angle of his beams. At the speed he had been traveling, the fully loaded rig would have jackknifed instantly, most likely pitching him over the embankment into the desert below. Hands trembling on the wheel, Marcus crept across the ice, his traction control kicking, and repeatedly as the tires fought to grip the glassy surface. Once clear, he seized a CB microphone, his voice shaking. "Breaker 1N. This is Desert Runner eastbound at mile marker 70. Be advised black ice ahead on the westbound side just past the curve. Repeat, black ice at mile marker 69. The replies came at once. "Copy that, Desert Runner. Appreciate the warning. But how'd you even spot it in this weather?" asked a westbound driver. Marcus hesitated, searching for an explanation that wouldn't make him sound insane. "Just lucky, I guess," he muttered, though he knew luck had nothing to do with it. He reached Reno without further incident, but the memory of his phantom passenger refused to leave him. The following morning, as his trailer was unloaded, he drove to the Nevada Highway Patrol office to file a report. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Patterson, a seasoned officer who had patrolled I-84 over 15 years. As Marcus described the woman, her cream-colored dress, perfectly arranged gray hair, slight European accent, and her repeated insistence on reaching her daughter in Renault, Patterson grew noticeably interested. "What did she look like exactly?" Patterson asked, pulling a thick, battered file from a drawer. Marcus repeated his description in detail. The sergeant nodded slowly, then produced a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1987. The headline read, "Elderly woman dies in I-80 crash near Huck." The photo alongside it showed the very same woman Marcus had picked up, suitcase and all. Her name was Eleanor Hoffman, age 73. She had been killed instantly when her Buick sedan struck black ice and overturned near mile marker 48. She had been en route to Reno to visit her daughter when the accident occurred. "She shows up every few years," Patterson explained grimly. "Always near mile 48. Always warning truckers about dangers ahead. We've logged at least a dozen reports since her death. The same woman, the same dress. Some drivers swear she vanishes from their cabs. Others don't see her at all." He slid several photographs of the 1987 crash across the desk. The wreckage of Eleanor's Buick was scattered across the very stretch of highway where Marcus had encountered the ice the night before. "The strange part," Patterson continued, "is that she only appears when there's real danger. Every single driver who's reported seeing her was spared from something: black ice washouts, drunk drivers, mechanical failures. It's like she's still trying to finish her trip to Reno." Marcus left the patrol office with a heavy mix of dread and gratitude. He had survived because of a woman who had died decades earlier, still protecting travelers along her final route. Over the months that followed, Marcus dug deeper into her story. He discovered that Eleanor's daughter, Margaret, had waited at the Reno bus station for 3 days after the accident. Unaware her mother had perished, Eleanor's suitcase had contained wrapped Christmas presents, gifts that never reached their destination. When Marcus shared his encounter with fellow truckers, the usually skeptical community began to take notice. More drivers came forward, with nearly identical stories, describing Eleanor's appearance near mile marker 48 whenever conditions grew perilous. A clear pattern emerged. She only appeared to those truly in danger. Her spectral warnings tied to the very hazard that had killed her. She never mentioned her own death, never hinted at her ghostly nature. She simply kept traveling toward Reno, as if her final journey had never ended. Moved by the story, Marcus commissioned a small memorial stone at mile marker 48. It bore her name and a simple inscription, "A guardian angel of the highway." The site soon became an unofficial shrine, where truckers left flowers, cups of coffee, and tokens of respect. Reports began to circulate of CB radios crackling with a woman's voice, of mysterious figures waving drivers down before vanishing, of sudden urges to slow down for no reason warnings that often saved lives. Even the Nevada Department of Transportation eventually acknowledged the Eleanor Hoffman phenomenon in safety briefings, adding more warning signs and stepping up winter maintenance in the area. Ironically, that deadly stretch of I-80 became one of the safest, not because of technology or enforcement, but because of the protective spirit of a woman who refused to let her journey end. To this day, veteran drivers tell rookies about Eleanor Hoffman, the ghostly hitchhiker of Interstate 80. They advise paying attention if an elderly woman suddenly appears along the Nevada desert roads, asking for a ride to see her family. "She saved my life," Marcus often tells others at truck stops. "She's still out, they're still trying to make it home, still making sure the rest of us do, too." The highway patrol keeps Eleanor's file open not as a mystery to be solved, but as a reminder of the strange bond between the living and the dead on America's loneliest highways. Her story stands as proof that some journeys truly transcend death and that our nation's roads are traveled by far more than the living. According to his fuel log, Jake Morrison should have reached Denver by sunrise. His meticulous records, built over a 15-year career as an owner-operator, showed a full tank purchased in Pueblo at 11:30 p.m., enough for the 120-mile run to his destination, with 40 gallons to spare. His GPS predicted an arrival time of 4:45 a.m., factoring in construction delays and his conservative driving pace. But when the sun rose over the Rockies that October morning, Jake Morrison was still on the same desolate stretch of U.S. Highway 50 he had entered 6 hours earlier, his fuel gauge nearly empty, his odometer inexplicably showing an extra 847 miles on what should have been a routine overnight haul. Jake Morrison was not the sort of man who second-guessed himself. At 41, his career had been built on discipline and accuracy, earning him the trust of companies that valued punctual deliveries and flawless records. His 2019 Kenworth W900L carried every piece of tracking technology, available electronic logging devices that recorded his movements to the second, dashcams that monitored both the highway and his own reactions, even redundant monitoring systems. Jake still kept handwritten paper logs as backup, carefully documenting fuel levels, road conditions, and weather like a researcher conducting fieldwork. That evening began like countless others. At exactly 11:47 p.m., he rolled out of the Flying J truck stop in Pueblo, hauling a trailer loaded with machine components bound for a Denver factory. The path before him was U.S. Highway 50 West, a road so familiar he could almost drive it blindfolded. More than 300 times he had traveled its length, his muscles knowing every curve past the Colorado State Fairgrounds, through Fowler and Manzanola, then northwest toward Colorado Springs, before connecting with I-25 north into Denver. The night was crisp, the temperature hovering near freezing, the forecast free of snow or rain. Traffic was sparse, mostly other truckers running graveyard shifts. Settling into his routine, Jake locked his cruise control at a precise 67 miles per hour, set the CB2 channel 19 for chatter, and let his favorite country station hum quietly in the background. At 12:23 a.m., he passed through Rocky Ford, jotting the details into his log. The streets were nearly empty, save for a couple of pickup trucks parked near a diner that never closed, likely other drivers, pausing for coffee before heading on. Nothing seemed out of place. He noticed the familiar grain elevator looming against the starry backdrop, the railroad crossing that always demanded caution, and the weathered billboard for a local car dealership that had stood unchanged for years. But 20 minutes later, at 12:43 a.m., Jake passed through Rocky Ford again. At first, he barely registered it. Truckers knew the feeling of highway hypnosis when miles blurred into background noise. He assumed he had mistaken another town for Rocky Ford until his GPS confirmed otherwise. The screen showed his location exactly where it had been before: Rocky Ford, Colorado, mile marker 43, US 50 West. He eased onto the shoulder, unnerved, and checked his equipment. The GPS displayed no errors. Its satellite lock was solid, with 3-foot accuracy. His odometer showed he had traveled 20.7 miles since leaving town. Exactly the distance expected for his speed. Yet impossibly, he was back at the same diner, staring at the same grain elevator, the same billboard advertising trucks he'd never buy. Trying to rationalize, Jake flipped open his paper atlas, the old-fashioned tool that had rescued him during countless electronic glitches. The map showed Highway 50 running straight west from Rocky Ford toward La Junta. No loops or back roads that could explain this displacement. He traced the route with his finger unbroken, direct. Still unsettled, he drove on, watching each detail with heightened awareness. At 12:51 a.m., he rolled past the Rocky Ford city limits again, marking it carefully in his log. In his mirrors, the elevator shrank, and soon the sequence of landmarks returned: an abandoned farmhouse with its leaning red barn, a concrete bridge spanning an irrigation canal, a cluster of rural mailboxes at a dirt track intersection. At 1:11 a.m., headlights swept across the farmhouse again. The same barn door sagged crookedly. The same shattered windows gaped. The same rickety water tower tilted in the background. These weren't look-alike structures. Jake knew them too well. He had seen this exact scene 20 minutes earlier, and now it was repeating. His hand shook as he reached for the CB. Breaker 19. This is Jake Morrison, westbound on Highway 50. Anyone out there confirm location? Static filled the speaker until a voice crackled through. This is Desert Rose, eastbound, on 50. Just came through La Junta about 10 minutes back. Where are you sitting, Jake? The voice was unmistakable Maria Santos, a fellow driver and longtime colleague whose route often crossed his. I think. I'm caught in some kind of loop near Rocky Ford, Jake admitted, wincing at how insane it sounded. I keep passing the same spots over and over. You ever heard of something like this? Silence hung for almost a minute before Maria responded, her tone tinged with worry. Jake, you okay out there? Maybe pull over, get some shut-eye. Graveyard runs mess with your head sometimes, but Jake knew better. He wasn't tired. His systems were fine. His mind was sharp, and the evidence was irrefutable. Determined, he began logging everything, time-stamped notes, photos of the GPS display, even voice recordings of each anomaly. If he was losing his grip, there would be a record to prove otherwise. At 1:31 a.m., he drove into Rocky Ford once more. Every detail was identical: the diner, the same trucks parked outside, the same burned-out street lamp near the rail crossing. But this time, something new froze his blood. Parked outside the diner was his own truck, a perfect double of his Kenworth W900L, bearing the same company logo, the same personalized call sign painted on the cab door. Jake pulled into the lot and stopped beside it. The duplicate was flawless. Every dent, every scrape, every smear of mud matched his own vehicle, down to the dent on the passenger door from an accident 3 years earlier. Even the trailer bore the same load number and destination tag, but the cab was empty. No driver sat behind the dark windshield. Jake Morrison wasn't the type of man to doubt himself. At 41, his livelihood rested on precision and consistency, and his reputation among freight companies came from being the driver who never slipped on details. His 2019 Kenworth W900L was a rolling fortress of technology, LDs logging his movements by the second, dashcams recording both the highway ahead and his own face, and layered monitoring systems tracking everything else. Even so, Jake still trusted his old-school paper logs, filling them with notes on fuel burn, road surface, and weather like a researcher keeping field notes. That night began no differently than hundreds before it. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Jake steered out of the Flying J in Pueblo, his trailer stacked with machine parts bound for a Denver plant. His path was the well-worn stretch of US Highway 50 West, so familiar he could almost navigate it with his eyes closed. He had made the trip more than 300 times, his muscles conditioned to each curve past the Colorado State Fairgrounds, through Fowler and Manzanola, then up northwest to meet I-25 north into Denver. The night was crisp, the air near freezing, but the forecast promised no rain or snow. The road was quiet, mostly long-haul rigs like his. Jake settled in, cruise control fixed at 67 miles per hour, CB set to channel 19, country music playing low in the background. By 12:23 a.m., he rolled through Rocky Ford, recording it in his log. The town was nearly deserted, just a few pickups outside, the 24-hour diner, where other drivers likely stopped for coffee. Everything looked as it always did, the towering grain elevator under the stars, the level crossing that always demanded care, and the fading billboard for a local car dealership that hadn't changed in years. 20 minutes later, at 12:43, he was passing through Rocky Ford again. At first, he brushed it off. Truckers knew the haze of highway hypnosis, when the road turned to a blur and towns seemed to blend. Maybe he'd mistaken a similar town. But his GPS told a different story. The display showed the same coordinates as before: Rocky Ford, mile marker 43, westbound on us-50. Uneasy. Jake guided the Kenworth onto the shoulder and checked his gear. The GPS signal was strong, no errors, its accuracy within 3 feet. His odometer confirmed 20.7 miles traveled since the last pass, exactly what it should read at his speed. Yet here he was again, staring at the same diner, the same grain elevator, the same aging billboard. He unfolded his paper atlas, tracing the route with his finger. Highway 50 ran straight from Rocky Ford to La Junta, no loops. No alternate spurs that could explain this impossible return. The line was unbroken. He shook off the chill creeping into his chest, eased back onto the highway, and kept moving, eyes fixed on every detail. At 12:51, he passed the Rocky Ford city limits again, making another careful note in his log. The landmarks unfolded in order. The abandoned farmhouse, with its sagging red barn. The concrete bridge over an irrigation canal. A scatter of mailboxes clustered at a dirt road. Then, at 1:11, his headlights swept across the farmhouse once more. The same tilted water tower loomed behind it. The same barn door hung askew. The same shattered panes in the windows glinted back at him. These weren't copies, they were the exact same sights. Jake's stomach knotted. His hands shook as he snatched up the CB. Breaker 19? This is Jake Morrison, westbound, on Highway 50. Can anyone confirm location? Static crackled until a voice broke through. This is Desert Rose, eastbound, on 50. Just cleared La Junta, about 10 minutes ago. Where you sitting, Jake? The voice was familiar. Maria Santos, a fellow driver he'd known for years, steady as they came. Jake hesitated before answering. I think I'm stuck in some kind of loop near Rocky Ford. I keep driving past the same spots over and over. You ever hear of anything like that? There was a pause. Then Maria's voice returned, laced with concern. Jake, you feeling all right? Maybe you ought to pull over, get some rest. Night runs can mess with your head. But Jake knew it wasn't fatigue. His rig was sound, his mind sharp. The evidence was staring him in the face. Determined to keep track, he began recording everything, notes with exact times, snapshots of the GPS voice memos describing each pass. If he was losing his grip, the record would at least speak for him. At 1:31, he rolled into Rocky Ford once again. Everything was identical. The diner, the same trucks outside, the same busted street lamp by the rail line. Only this time, something new turned his blood to ice. There, parked in the diner's lot, was his own truck, an exact duplicate of his Kenworth W900L, down to the company's logo and his personalized call sign painted on the cab. Jake pulled in and parked beside it. The match was flawless. Every dent, every scrape, even the mud streaks on the tires, were identical, including the dent on the passenger door from a minor mishap 3 years earlier. The trailer bore the same load number and delivery tags as his, but the cab sat dark. No driver behind the glass. The voice on the CB wasn't one Linda recognized. It carried a strange cadence, touched by an accent that seemed to belong to another time altogether. She checked her mirrors, then scanned the highway ahead. Nothing but dark pavement, stretching toward distant mountains beneath a November sky crowded with unusually bright stars. At 28, Linda Washington was part of a legacy. She represented the second generation of Washington truckers, following in the tracks her father had laid decades earlier. He had driven these same southwestern routes during the 70s and 80s, back when CB radios were the lifeline between drivers, and the road was filled with both mystery and danger. He used to tell her stories of nights when the airwaves were alive, with voices and warnings, when the work carried both camaraderie and risk. For Linda, the road was more than asphalt and logistics. As a Cherokee woman raised on her grandmother's teachings, she knew the land carried memories, and that spirits sometimes lingered where paths had been worn for centuries. Though many dismissed such beliefs as old superstitions, Linda held fast to them. She drove a modern Riga 2017 Freightliner Cascadia equipped with cutting-edge safety systems, collision avoidance tech, electronic logs, and everything else that defined 21st century trucking. The truck was built to eliminate uncertainty, to make the profession less perilous than in her father's day. Yet she still carried sage and sweetgrass in the cab, left offerings of tobacco at sacred places, and acknowledged the land she crossed as belonging to the tribes who had walked it long before concrete highways. That night, she was hauling consumer electronics from Phoenix to Oklahoma City, a run she had done many times. The cargo was valuable, the schedule tight, but nothing unusual. At 3:23 a.m., she crested a rise and froze. Ahead, a string of taillights glowed red against the horizon, stretched out like fallen stars across the earth. At least 20 vehicles moved in formation, westbound, perfectly aligned. The sight struck her as wrong. The trucks followed one another far closer than modern safety rules would allow. Their spacing unnaturally even, and their lights didn't match today's configurations. They looked like relics from another era. Reaching for the mic, Linda keyed up her CB. Breaker 19. This is Cherokee Rose westbound on I-40, near mile marker 120. I got eyes on that convoy you mentioned. You still tracking them? Static whispered through the speaker. Then the same unfamiliar voice returned, clearer now, but echoing oddly, like it was bouncing through canyons. Copy that, Cherokee Rose. They're moving fast, maybe 75-80 miles an hour. Never seen anything like it. Not answering calls, and no company logos I can spot on the trailers. The voice faltered for a moment, wind rushing faintly behind it. And there's more. They're running dark. No markers, no clearance lights, only taillights, like they don't want to be seen. As Linda continued, closing the gap, her headlights caught glimpses of the convoy, and unease clawed at her gut. These weren't modern rigs at all. Their silhouettes were unmistakably from the 1950s and early 60s. Shorter trailers with rounded corners, chrome trim glinting faintly, their shapes belonging to a bygone age. Her CB suddenly came alive with chatter, not from today's drivers, but from voices locked in their own world. They used outdated 10 codes, referred to places by names long abandoned, and spoke casually of fuel stops and diners that had vanished decades ago. The transmissions bled through her speakers, like a broadcast from the past. Then a voice cut sharp and clear. Breaker for the Shadow Fleet. This is Desert Ghost running drag. We got company tailing USA Cherokee Rose in a white Freightliner. Should we clear her to pass? Linda's hands tightened on the wheel. The term Shadow Fleet was one she had never heard, but it carried a weight that chilled her. In her mind, her grandmother's stories rose tales of spirit travelers, forever bound to ancient roads, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, always moving along the old paths of power. Interstate 40, she remembered, lay across historic Route 66, itself layered over even older trading trails carved out by indigenous people. She pressed the mic, her voice steady, despite the dread crawling her skin. This is Cherokee Rose to Desert Ghost. I'm not looking to pass, just keeping my schedule. You folks running special tonight? The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Then Desert Ghost's reply came, his voice lined with exhaustion, sadness, like a man carrying decades of weariness. We're always running, Cherokee Rose. Been running this stretch since 1952, trying to finish what we started. Some races never end, even when the drivers are long gone. The signal faded into static, leaving Linda shivering at the wheel. She switched on her dashcam, speaking into it, documenting every detail for later. The convoy ahead moved like no convoy she had ever seen. Each rig held perfect spacing, synchronized, down to the inch, as if guided by one unseen hand. Curves and grades were handled as though choreographed, their movements too fluid, too precise to be human. Later, during a rest break, Linda would dig into New Mexico's trucking history and uncover the tragedy behind the so-called Shadow Fleet. In 1952, 21 independent truckers attempted a record-breaking run across the state, from Arizona to Texas in a promotional stunt. They pushed their rigs at reckless speeds, certain their skills could tame the desert. But mechanical failures, exhaustion, and treacherous roads conspired against them. The result was catastrophe near the very stretch Linda had driven that night. A mass accident that killed 13 drivers and destroyed most of the trucks. Survivors never spoke publicly. The sponsoring company collapsed in disgrace within months, but perhaps the dead had never stopped. When Linda later spoke with Navajo elders, they told her the land remembered. Ghost lights, phantom vehicles, the sound of CB chatter from empty roads, these had been reported for generations. To them, the Shadow Fleet was another echo in a place where the living and the dead sometimes crossed paths. As she continued to watch the convoy, something even stranger occurred. The trucks ahead seemed to shift. Their tarnished chrome began to gleam, faded paint brightened, and their engines smoothed as though time itself was winding backward, restoring them to their prime. Linda realized she wasn't just watching spirits trapped on a road. She was watching them return to the moment of their last run, over and over again. Her radio filled with their voices discussing routes, fuel, strategy, plans for a record run. The chatter carried the optimism of men convinced they were about to make history, oblivious to the fate that awaited them. And then, clear as if he sat in the cab beside her, Desert Ghost's voice returned. Cherokee rose. "We're nearing the crossing point," Desert Ghost's voice murmured through the CB, heavy with meaning. "If you want to honor the old ways, now is the time to show respect." Coordinates followed, and Linda instantly recognized them. Her grandmother had spoken of that site countless times, a powerful intersection where ancient trails converged, a place where offerings were made to ensure safe passage. Linda pulled into the next wide turnout, retrieving the sage and tobacco she always carried for moments like this. Moving with reverence, she followed the ceremonial steps her grandmother had taught her. She laid the offerings down, speaking softly to the unseen drivers, honoring their sacrifice, and asking for their blessing over all who braved these dangerous desert highways. When she finished, she looked back toward the road. The convoy was dissolving, their taillights dimming, shrinking into the horizon until they blended with the stars above. Then they were gone. Her CB fell silent, the spectral chatter replaced by the ordinary transmissions of flesh and blood truckers, making their own late-night runs. Returning to her freightliner, Linda felt a deep, humbling weight. She had glimpsed something both sacred and tragic, an echo of human determination that had outlasted death itself. The Shadow Fleet would keep running, eternally chasing the finish line that had claimed their lives. They would remain both warning and guardian, haunting the very roads they once lived upon. Her haul to Oklahoma City continued without further incident, but the experience clung to her. In the weeks that followed, as she returned to her usual freight routes, she began researching other accounts from native drivers. To her surprise, she uncovered an entire web of stories, a hidden network of men and women who had seen the same things, heard the same ghostly chatter, and encountered convoys that had no business existing in the present day. The conclusion was inescapable. The highways of the Southwest carried more than just the living. They carried memory, and sometimes, when the conditions were right, the dead returned to remind travelers of the risks written into the pavement. Cherokee Rose, as she was known over the airwaves, began sharing her story on a CB channel devoted to supernatural encounters. There she found kinship with other drivers who spoke openly of phantom rigs, restless spirits, and strange guardians of the road. Together, they became an informal brotherhood of witnesses truckers who believed that honoring the unseen was as essential as checking your brakes or logging your hours. Even today, drivers on I-40 through New Mexico report vintage convoys flashing into existence, only to vanish without explanation. CB radios still crackle with ghost voices discussing outdated routes and deadlines that belonged to another century. The Shadow Fleet continues its endless race, trapped in a loop of time. Their eternal struggle, offering both eerie guidance and a silent kind of protection to those still alive behind the wheel. But the story did not end there. There was nothing wrong with Tommy Chen's odometer. Roadmaster Truck Services in Santa Fe had confirmed that on November 8, 2023, every system on his 2020 Peterbilt 389 was functioning exactly as it should. Only 3 weeks earlier, during his annual DOT inspection, the digital odometer had been checked and certified accurate to within a tenth of a mile. Yet, Tommy's meticulously kept maintenance logs told a different story. On a run that should have covered 89 miles between Santa Fe and Roswell along US Highway 285, his truck inexplicably registered 347 extra miles. Tommy was no ordinary driver. Before the economic collapse of 2008 had derailed his career, he had earned a mechanical engineering degree from UC Berkeley. Trucking had begun as a stopgap solution, but 15 years later, he had transformed it into a thriving owner-operator business by applying scientific discipline to every mile. Where most truckers trusted instinct and experience, Tommy trusted data. He logged everything: fuel efficiency, tire wear, route optimization algorithms he coded himself. His cab was a rolling laboratory, packed with redundancies, multiple GPS units, electronic logging devices, tire pressure sensors, engine monitors. His spreadsheets documented his rig's life in exhausting precision. To him, trucking was an equation solved for the variables, and uncertainty disappeared. That November night started like countless others. With his pre-trip ritual, a 47-point inspection checklist he never skipped. His trailer was loaded with delicate laboratory equipment bound for the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Socorro, cargo that required climate control and vibration monitoring. His chosen route down Highway 285 was straightforward, well-maintained. Blacktop. 2 hours and 12 minutes of driving through high desert, with small communities like Lamy, Galistio, and Vaughn punctuating the journey. At 10:47 p.m., Tommy rolled out of Santa Fe. He noted the odometer reading 847,329.7 miles, writing it into his log alongside tire pressures, fuel levels, and weather conditions. Clear skies, cold air, no sign of storms. The GPS confirmed his southbound course towards Socorro, the drive as routine as it gets. But at 11:23 p.m., routine fractured. Passing what should have been mile marker 341, he instead found himself next to a sign that read 347. His GPS still showed him on course, roughly 36 miles south of Santa Fe, exactly where he should have been. Yet the marker didn't fit. Assuming an equipment error, Tommy pulled over to check. But every one of his system's 3 GPS units, compass, logs aligned perfectly. They all insisted he was in the right place. The math, however, refused to cooperate. He pulled out his old-fashioned road atlas, cross-checking with dot charts. Highway 285's markers were supposed to decrease, heading south, counting down from Colorado toward Texas. Yet here he was, staring at a marker that didn't belong. He pressed on, sharper-eyed now. At 11:31, he passed marker 348. 8 minutes later, 349. The numbers were climbing as though he were driving north. Yet every instrument, every compass, every star in the sky confirmed he was pushing south. The laws of navigation had stopped making sense. Tommy grabbed his CB radio, hoping to reach other truckers running the same stretch. Breaker 1 to 9. This is Pacific Engineer. Southbound on Highway 285, near mile marker 350. Can anyone confirm the mile marker sequence on this route? These numbers aren't lining up with what I expected. For a few seconds the channel was filled only with static. Then a voice broke through, strained, warped, as if carried from miles beyond normal range. or filtered through some strange interference. Pacific Engineer, this is Desert Scholar. I've been driving 285 for nearly 4 decades, and I've never seen the markers behave like this. They're counting backward from where I began, even though I'm moving in the same direction I always do. The answer steadied Tommy even as it unsettled him. He wasn't alone in facing these strange navigational distortions. Still, as he pressed farther south, the mile markers confirmed the bizarre reversal. He rolled past 351, then 352, then 353 numbers, climbing higher instead of dropping, distance, somehow measured in reverse. But the environment unnerved him even more. The view outside his windshield seemed to slide backward in time. Modern pavement faded into older concrete, signage shifted to outdated fonts, and the few distant buildings looked like they were aging in reverse, their architecture updating to earlier decades. As he drove, Tommy flicked on his dash cams, documenting each detail while narrating like a scientist logging field notes. Time is 11:47 p.m. Odometer reading 847,365.4 miles. Approximately 36 miles from point of departure, but markers indicate position 354, still climbing. GPS coordinates match correct southbound trajectory, yet physical evidence suggests a temporal component to travel. The radio only deepened the anomaly. It picked up live-sounding broadcasts that didn't belong to this year rock from the 60s. News bulletins about events from his boyhood, weather updates for storms long past. Even traffic reports warning of closures, decades old. None felt like replays. They carried the immediacy of real-time chatter. Then, at marker 359, Tommy's worldview cracked. Another semi appeared ahead, heading north. His headlights revealed the exact model as his own Peterbilt 389, painted in the same scheme, with the same logos he himself had designed. And behind the wheel, Tommy saw himself, a younger version, dressed in styles from years earlier, face still bright with the confidence of a driver who hadn't yet seen the impossible. The trucks passed in seconds, but Tommy's sharp eyes caught the other cab's open logbook. His own handwriting filled the pages, recording trips from his early career, back when he was just carving out a name for himself. He had just crossed paths with his younger self. He slammed the mic. Desert Scholar, Pacific Engineer, here. Did you catch that northbound Peterbilt? It was my rig driven by me, a younger me. The reply came quick, tinged with equal awe and dread. Pacific Engineer, you're not alone. I've spotted multiple versions of my own truck tonight, each from a different point in my career. They're scattered across this road, like snapshots. I think we're not just moving through distance, we're moving through time, as the hours wore on. Tommy realized Highway 285 itself had slipped out of the normal timeline. The reversed markers weren't just counting distance backward, they were pulling him deeper into his own past. His truck ran smoothly, but the road existed in a flux where yesterday, today, and tomorrow bled into one another. He encountered himself repeatedly, once as a nervous rookie grinding mountain passes, later as a mid-career pro fine-tuning routes and cultivating clients, and at countless stages between. Each sighting mirrored his choices, mistakes, and hard-won lessons. Meanwhile, the CB exploded into a jumble of voices from all eras, drivers from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, talking across decades. They argued over fuel prices of their day, griped about regulations repealed long ago, and praised or cursed technology that had since turned obsolete. Highway 285 had become a living archive of every word, every journey ever carried across its span. At mile marker 381, Tommy stopped. Rather than be dragged further back, he put the brakes on and leaned into his engineering training. He began systematic tests, logging GPS points, weather data, clock speeds, and system readouts. He noticed time itself behaved inconsistently. His digital clocks ticked fast or slow, depending on exact location. His odometer's reversal wasn't a glitch, but a true reading of distance traveled backward into the past. The breakthrough came when he triangulated the distortion. The phenomenon centered on a point about 15 miles south of Santa Fe, site of a deadly 1987 pileup that had killed multiple people and triggered highway redesigns. Reports had blamed fatigue, poor lighting, and confusing marker placement. Tommy theorized that the tragedy had torn a scar into the temporal fabric, a wound that looped travelers through fragments of history. At 3:17 a.m., the precise time of the old accident, the entire distortion collapsed. The world lurched back into order. His odometer corrected itself, GPS synced with reality, and markers returned to normal. The CB fell silent except for modern drivers chatting about mundane runs. He made his delivery to the National Radio Astronomy Observatory as scheduled, but the night never left him. He filed reports with state and federal agencies, backed by meticulous data, but officials dismissed his account as exhaustion and malfunction. Yet over the years, other drivers described identical anomalies near the same markers during the accident's anniversary. Backward counting, ghostly broadcasts, encounters with their own younger selves. The state eventually admitted to receiving multiple complaints, but chalked them up to GPS glitches and optical tricks. Among drivers, however, the legend solidified. That stretch became known as the Backwards Mile, a place where time itself could betray you. Tommy avoided it afterward during anniversary nights, though he warned colleagues through forums and CB networks. His background in engineering gave him theories that trauma and human emotion could imprint highways like scars, bending physics where countless lives had intersected. To this day, he logs and catalogs temporal anomalies across the trucking world, aiming toward a broader theory of America's roads as both transport routes and repositories of memory. The Backwards Mile had taught him something raw and permanent. Highways do not just carry us through space, they remember, and sometimes they play those memories back. Meanwhile, another mystery was brewing. David Park, a seasoned 38 driver, failed to check in after a route he had run more than 200 times. Dispatch at Mountain West Freight expected his morning call at 6:30 a.m., but silence stretched on. His 2021 Freightliner Cascadia carried advanced tracking systems. Satellite comms and emergency beacons, yet every monitor showed nothing. Sometime in the early hours of December 15, 2023, along I-70 in eastern Utah, David Park and his truck had vanished without a trace. David wasn't just another driver. With 12 years of spotless record, no accidents, no violations, never a late haul, he embodied professionalism. He was a devoted family man who phoned his wife Sarah nightly at exactly 8 p.m., a tradition unbroken until the night of his disappearance. Conservative in planning and always building buffers for weather or breakdowns, David was the last person anyone expected to simply vanish. To this day, he logs and catalogs temporal anomalies across the trucking world, aiming toward a broader theory of America's roads as both transport routes and repositories of memory. The Backwards Mile had taught him something raw and permanent. Highways do not just carry us through space, they remember. And sometimes they play those memories back. But one question still gnawed at him. If he had crossed paths with younger versions of himself on Highway 285, then somewhere out there, still driving endlessly through the loop, might be his future self, an older Tommy who never escaped. Every year, as the anniversary of the 1987 crash approaches, he feels the pull to return. He swears he can hear faint whispers of CB chatter drifting through static when he drives at night, snatches of voices calling him by name, urging him back to the mile markers. He knows better than to answer. Yet deep down, Tommy Chen fears that one night, whether by accident or by fate, his rig will carry him again onto that stretch of road. And this time, He may not find his way out, and maybe that older Tommy is already waiting for him. Headlights cutting through the desert dark, somewhere along the backwards mile.